What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of J-Rank. Today we're taking a look at my top 25 rankings just prior to the college football playoff ranking debut later tonight. To start, we're going to put in some teams that just missed the rankings. Honestly, anywhere from 30 to 20, you can really make an argument for just about anybody. There's a hodgepodge of, in my opinion, good but not great teams just messing around in here. So we're going to start off with these teams. The just missed, in no particular order, Syracuse, Texas Tech, South Carolina, Clemson, and finally, Louisiana. These teams are all, like I said before, good but not great. Syracuse is 6-2, Texas Tech 6-3, South Carolina 5-3, Clemson 6-2, Louisiana 7-1. Louisiana hasn't played anybody. Clemson hasn't beaten anybody good that they've played. South Carolina has beaten good teams and lost to good teams. They've had a very difficult schedule. I can understand having them ranked, but to me, 5 wins isn't enough to have you ranked at this point in the season. Texas Tech is super inconsistent. Same with Syracuse. Jumping into the top 25. At 25, people aren't going to like how low I have these guys, but I've got LSU. I've got too many questions. Undoubtedly, they have lots of star power. They've got, good talent and stuff, but at the same time, so does USC. When I look at LSU, I don't quite see, like a top 20 team. I'm not quite sure where everybody else is going. I get that they've got some metrics behind them because of all that talent, but what I've seen on the field isn't that great, especially with how they lost to Texas A&M, who got destroyed by South Carolina. At number 24, I've got Louisville. Louisville, they looked impressive against Clemson, who's a good team. They've lost their other 3 to good teams, Notre Dame, SMU. They've had a tough schedule as well. They're looking pretty solid, good enough to make, cause some damage in the ACC. At 23, I've got Vanderbilt. I am on the Vanderbilt, hype train or whatever they've got there. You can make a case for that, or for Louisville over Vandy, just because of a harder strength of schedule. But I like what I've seen on the field overall, a little more from Vanderbilt. These rankings, they're sort of a mix between resume rankings and power rankings. The way I look at it is, how good are you based on what you've done, type of a thing. So, yeah, coming in at 22, I've got Colorado. They're a good team. They're going to make some noise in the Big 12. They might be the Big 12 champions. They could very well be in that Big 12 championship game. There's quite the simple path. They win out, and then they've got 1 loss in conference play, and then they just have to win. They just need Iowa State to lose once. Iowa State plays Kansas State in what will be an interesting game at the end of the season, although it lost some luster with how those 2 teams played this last weekend. There's a real path for them to the Big 12 championship game. If they can spring the upset over BYU in that game, then they'd be a playoff team. That'd be pretty cool. Colorado's a good team. It'd be fun to watch Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter in the playoffs. At number 21, and I'll explain why these guys are over Colorado as I fill out the rankings a little more. I've got Tulane. They're playing good football, sitting at 7-2. Their losses are to Kansas State and to, as well as to Oklahoma. Tulane and Colorado both played Kansas State in pretty similar games. That Kansas State is ahead of both of them. But to me, Tulane has looked better in the rest of their games than Colorado has, although Colorado's probably got a slightly harder strength of schedule. It's pretty comparable. Those guys are interchangeable to me. At number 20, I've got Washington State. This could be too high. It could be too low. It's kind of hard for me to judge these guys because the lone good team they've played is Boise State, who destroyed them. The rest of their teams that they've played and will play for the remainder of the year are not very good, and they've been iffy in those games, but they are sitting at with just one loss, and that's impressive. It's so easy to lose games you shouldn't. Notre Dame. So, yeah. At 19, I've got the Kansas State Wildcats. These guys are baffling to me. They should be a lot better. They've got such a potent rushing attack. They should not lose to Houston, of all people. Houston's trending up for sure, but we wouldn't be talking about them trending up if they hadn't beat Kansas State, really. At number 18, I've got Iowa State. I still think they're better than Kansas State. You can make an argument for them to be higher, but they haven't really played anybody. That loss to Texas Tech, man, they should have won that game if their defense could have just pulled that stop, they had the lead with just a couple minutes left, and then their offense just didn't have enough time to pull off a game-winning drive at the end. 17, I've got Pitt. I think these guys are still good. They got destroyed by SMU, but I think SMU has been one of the more underrated teams throughout the course of the college football season. If you go back and look at my rankings for the last couple weeks, I have SMU pretty high. So Pitt, I'm not gonna down them too much. They lost pretty embarrassingly, but I still think they're better than the teams beneath them. Next I've got Texas A&M. It's hard to know what to make of these guys. Texas A&M is a good football team. Inarguably, Texas A&M is a good football team, but they got destroyed by South Carolina. What do I make of them beating LSU? Oh, I'm not as high as LSU as most people are. Same time, to be leading the SEC, it's fascinating, but the SEC, every team has one loss. It's a mess. The SEC really is. And if things keep going downhill, there's paths where the SEC gets 2 or 3 is all into the playoffs. We were talking about preseason about how the SEC might get 5 teams in the playoff. No way. I doubt they'll get 4 even. Because of the way things are playing out, they're beating each other up. In the Big 12, which is doing the exact same thing, we're calling it chaos. With the SEC, we're calling it parity. I don't think that's completely fair. But I do think that, those conferences, both the SEC and the Big 12, they're crazy. They're both chaotic. Going in at 15, some people will call this too low. It's Alabama. They've got a huge win over a good Georgia team, but honestly, the rest of Missouri, you'll notice I don't even have them in just missed. I'm not impressed with Missouri, and I'm not impressed really too much with Alabama's victory. I mean, it was dominant, but I'm still putting Alabama at 15. They're a top 15 team. They're a good team. They can't afford to lose again. They have to beat LSU. If they lose again, I can't see them making the college football playoff. We will see what the committee thinks of Alabama later today, so I'm super excited for that. And then at 14, I've got Penn State. If you go back and look at my previous videos as well, you'll notice that I'm not as high as Penn State as most people. I kind of expected, that Ohio State game to be interesting. And it was interesting, but ultimately Penn State did what they always do, lose to good teams. They're always a good team, but they're never a great team because they can't beat other good teams. I still expect them to make the playoff because they don't have a difficult enough schedule the rest of the way. but I don't love Penn State. I think whatever team they play in that first round will probably win. Coming in at 13, I've got Army. I'm giving these guys a lot of credit, and some people won't like how high I have Army. And people, I feel like, kind of forgot about Army once Navy lost. You know, there's no more Army and Navy are doing so good. Now they just have to focus on Army, and Army had the bye week this last week. They're a good football team. They've beaten up on nobodies, but they're still a good football team. And I'm super stoked for that game, Army versus Notre Dame. That's going to be an absolute thriller. I think a lot more competitive than the Navy game. I've always thought Army had an edge that Navy didn't. And I do think that Army's not going to give up so many freebies to Notre Dame like Navy did. And so I'm super excited to see that game, see what Army can do against good competition. Man, it'll be a real scenario if Army goes undefeated and we've got one loss Boise State. Who does the committee put in? I think they do Boise State if it was today, but people forget that Army has plenty of chances to get some good wins, Navy and Notre Dame, namely, that Boise State just doesn't have. Boise State's marquee thing is a good loss right now, I feel like. Coming in at 12 and 11, I'll group these two together. I've got Tennessee here at 12 and Texas at 11. I get it. Like, you look at all the strength of record, strength of schedule, those types of metrics, and they're high on these guys. But you watch them play, and you're like, that's not like a top 10 team, you know? It's a good team. They're both good teams, but they don't quite have the, like, it factor that you look for in good teams. People are going to be annoyed that I put this team ahead of them, but I've actually got Ole Miss at 10. Ole Miss is a good football team. They showed that against Arkansas. I mean, their offense was absurdly good against Arkansas. Like, so good. And their offense has been good all season. It slowed down during SEC play a little bit, but I think Ole Miss versus Georgia this upcoming weekend will be an absolute thriller. I wouldn't be surprised if Ole Miss is able to spring the upset with how Georgia's been looking. But Ole Miss, nevertheless, they're a good football team. I think they've got a little too difficult of a schedule to make the playoff, but if they get through Georgia, there's a real shot for them. At 9, I've got Notre Dame. I'm going to be so excited to see what the committee thinks of Notre Dame, because it's, how do you put wins over good teams like Navy and Texas A&M versus that horrible loss to a mid-at-best MAC team in Northern Illinois? I'm going to be so excited to see how the committee thinks of Notre Dame tonight. Notre Dame, but they've looked good recently, and that's really a big thing. Like, how have they looked the last few weeks? Like, the last few weeks is kind of the football team you are right now. Obviously, you got to take a holistic approach, but Notre Dame's definitely trending up. They've looked better and better. Like I said earlier, I'm super thrilled for that Army game. That'll tell us a lot, I think, about both teams. Now, I will say that Navy win doesn't look quite as good. And I think it tells us less about Notre Dame than we like to think. But nevertheless, I like Notre Dame at 9. At 8, I've got Boise State. People will probably call this high, but they've got a dominant offense. Not just Ashton Jeanty. He's really good, and he should be the Heisman favorite at this point in the season. He, rightly so, is right up there. But people forget that because of how scared everybody else is, for good reason, of him, they neglect the passing defense. Maddox Madsen is a great quarterback. He's far from elite, but he's more than good enough to go and lead that team, and he's able to make plays because everybody is so scared of Ashton Ginty. That makes Boise State's offense one of the most scary in the country, because if you don't just stop the box, Ashton Ginty's going to average 10 yards a carry. But if you do, then Madsen's just going to pass for 300 yards in the game. It's so difficult for opponents of Boise State. Boise State's defense is solid, but not great. I think any game that they end up in the playoffs will probably be a high-scoring, fun affair, but they're a scary team. I like them to make noise. At 7, I've got SMU. Like, what are we doing? In what world is SMU not, like, top 10, borderline, like, has a real reason to say they're top 5? Their lone loss by 3 to BYU. During that game, they made their quarterback change, and BYU did an admirable job of shutting down Kevin Jennings in that game. But, like, SMU has looked so good. That Pitt game was more dominant to SMU than the score looked, and the score looked like SMU dominated them. I mean, SMU is very good. Been playing good football for weeks, but they've kind of snuck under the radar. I think even still they're a little under the radar. They won't have any more chances to really impress people because they don't have a particularly difficult schedule going forward. They don't play Clemson or Miami, who are the other top teams in the ACC. I think SMU will go to that ACC title game against Miami, and that'll be an absolute thriller. I think both of those teams should be in the college football playoff. At number 6, speaking of them, I've got Miami. Like, people keep calling Miami a fluke, and I'm like, man, those games, they're closer than they should be, yada, yada, yada. But credit Miami, man. They just keep finding ways to win. Duke game, I was like, oh, Duke might spring the upset. And then, no, fourth quarter Miami happened where they're just the best team in college football during the fourth quarter. It's absurd. Miami's really good. Cam Ward's really good. He made a couple weird decisions, and I think he's still prone to random stuff like that. But when he's throwing for, 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, it's you can afford a crazy interception here and there, I think. Not 3 like Carson Beck. We'll talk about him in a minute. But I do like Miami at 6. I think that's about where they belong, fringe top 5. But they don't quite have the resume yet to be any higher, in my opinion. At number 5, I've got the Ohio State. And for what it's worth, 7 through 2, I think you can kind of make an argument for anybody around that area. The caveat to me is BYU has to be above SMU because of the head-to-head. Well, I'll fill that in later. Ohio State at 5, that win over Penn State's impressive, except Penn State doesn't know how to beat Ohio State, so it's like, But Penn State's still a good team. Ohio State's looked good. Their lone loss barely to Oregon in a game that they absolutely fumbled. I don't know what that was. But Ohio State's a good team. I like them at 5. Number 4, I've got Indiana. Yes, I think Indiana's a better football team than Ohio State. I think when that game rolls around, Indiana versus Ohio State, I think Indiana will win. Curt Cignetti is an absurdly good football coach. Curtis Rourke is an absurdly good quarterback. Comes back from injury and destroys Michigan State. They did trail in that game. They were down 10-0. But they won 47-10, and that's like the average score of an Indiana game so far this season. Yes, they've had a weak strength of schedule, but I think once they get the chance to show how good they are against some big boys like Ohio State, they're gonna show that they deserve to be a top 5 team. I like Indiana a lot. Number 3, I've got BYU. I think BYU is a top 5 team at the least. I slot them in at number 3. The disrespect they're getting, I don't understand, because they have some quality wins. Kansas State's a quality win, and SMU is absolutely a quality win, going on the road and beating SMU, who could very well be the ACC champion, and will probably end up being at least the ACC runner-up. That's impressive. What they did to Kansas State, like 38-9 against Kansas State, that's impressive. Their their Oklahoma State game was closer than it should have been. The fact that they had to do a game-winning drive to go win it, like, that shouldn't have to happen. But then again, there's other top teams that have losses that weren't able to go beat teams they should, such as Notre Dame wasn't able to go beat a team they should, right? And then other teams just haven't showed that ability to make plays that they need to go win games. Georgia couldn't beat Alabama. Ohio State couldn't beat Oregon, stuff like that. So I like BYU at 3. They're underrated. They've got a good defense. They've got a good offense. They've got good special teams. One of the most complementary teams in college football. I don't get why they're not higher. I'm guessing the playoff committee tonight will slot them in around 6 or 7, a little higher than their AP poll ranking, but I think they do deserve to be higher than that. At number 2, I've got Georgia, and then, of course, number 1, they're everybody's number 1 for a good reason. I've got Oregon. Let me talk through this. Oregon's clearly number 1. Not only have they looked dominant, but they have probably the best resume in college football. Wins over Ohio State and Boise State have aged extremely well, and they're playing good football. Now, I will say both those wins were close. The 2 good teams they played, it was close, but winning is what matters, and they beat them. And they beat them close. They showed that they could win close games, like I talked about with BYU. That's important and impressive. Georgia at 2. They've had such a difficult strength of schedule so far that where their record, where it's at, is impressive. I like them at 2. You can make a case, really, like I said earlier, 2 through 7. I'm okay with being slid around, however you like. These teams all have, in my opinion, legitimate arguments to be top 5. This is just the way I see it. So yeah, this is my top 25. Thanks for watching. If you have anything you think I should change, if you want to let me know your personal rankings, different things, the way you think it'll pan out, please let me know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. And as always, have a great day. Please tune in tomorrow, where after I see the college football playoff rankings, I'm going to predict the college football playoff. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.